Hello, this is Abhinav Prakash and this is my first video blog ever. So I welcome all of you. Today I thought I will discuss something about the farmers' protest and the wider politics behind the farmers' protest. When we talk about representation in India, we normally talk about the caste, the religion, the reason. We normally do not talk about the rural and the urban representation in the wider Indian polity. But that is a very important thing today because today India is essentially an urban majority country. Now, while the census data tells you that the urbanization in India is around 35-40%, and different studies also says it might be 40% or maybe 45%. But my point is that these data are gross underestimation of the urban population in India, because the classification definition of the census is very obsolete, and also most of the other studies also do not capture the huge migration which happens in India. So even though the people are registered as the voters in their villages or in their small towns or kasbas, they might have their permanent address out there, but they are living in the urban centers, in metropolitan centers for decades. So this is a big problem in the Indian polity, that we underestimate our urban population, we overestimate our rural population. In fact, there are several studies, especially based on the satellite data, which basically says that the urbanization in India may be as high as 64% today, almost more than the double than the what we estimate through the census a couple of years back. So why is that important? That is important that we are not used to looking at India as an urban country. There is too much of romanticism associated with the village. For too long, India has been seen as a village-based civilization, now which is quite interesting because villages cannot form civilization. These civilizations are always about the cities, the urban centers. The rise of the cities basically heralds the emergence of a civilization, because that tells you, that shows you that the society has now reached a level of economic and social and political sophistication driven by technological changes, that it is not distinguished from the subsistence level existence. But somehow we don't understand this basic fact of civilization. The group of villages or the villages can only form a culture at best. They can never form a civilization. That is why when you talk about civilization, you talk about Harappa, you talk about ancient Egypt, you talk about Iranians or Mesopotamians. The era you always talk about is an urban, the rise of the urban centers in those places, because civilization is always about urbanization. I'm not doing a value judgment here, I'm simply stating a fact. But in India, there is too much of romanticism associated with the village and the rural life. And I would say it started in the British rule, when the Europeans started characterizing India as timeless, spiritual, otherworldly society, where people are not interested in materialistic pursuit, but they are living their life dictated by the strict rules of caste, and are always thinking about the moksha and whatnot. And in response to this European characterization of the India, almost all the responses which arose in India against the imperialism, they all uncritically accepted this view of India. So their standard response was, yes, India is a village society, India is a spiritual society, Indians are high-minded spiritual people in pursuit of some great philosophy or moksha, which is quite silly by the way, but this is what the standard response was. But this is good. I mean, this is what we are, and we are better than the industrial, materialistic West. Now, Gandhi exemplifies the extreme reaction, in this spectrum. But even the Hindu nationalists, even the socialists, were not immune from this delusion. And this delusion, this distortion in our thinking has continued even after the independence. So after independence, instead of recognizing that agriculture is simply just another profession, is just a source of livelihood, Instead of recognizing that, we have elevated agriculture and especially the kisan to a status of divinity. No, the entire thing of किसान अन्नदाता है, असली भारत गांव में रहता है. I mean, how can किसान भी अन्नदाता? अगर किसान अन्नदाता है तो क्या टाटा स्टील डाटा है, क्या जियो डेटा डाटा है, क्या बाटा जो है क्या वो जूता डाटा है? I never understood this logic. What is this अन्नदाता? The किसान is not doing any उपकार on anyone. किसान किसी पे उपकार नहीं करता है खेती करके, वो उसका लाइवलीहुड है, वो उसका प्रोफेशन है और उसको वैसे ही देखना चाहिए, बजाय इसमें सेंटिमेंटलिटी अटैच करने को या बजाय इसमें कुछ उसको उसका महिमा मंडन करने को, जैसे हम हिंदी में बोलते हैं. सो दिस इज अ प्रॉब्लम इन दी हाउ वी लुक एट अवर सोसाइटी एंड अवर इकोनॉमी इन जनरल. एंड नाउ व्हाट दैट इज लेड टू. Now, if you think about the agriculture, the kisan are a small part of the agriculture society. Even if you go to the countryside, if I'm not wrong, the majority of the population in the villages is either landless laborers or the ones who have marginal land holding. So the kisan, the kind of the kind of picture which emerges in our mind, those are very small fraction even of the agrarian population. The majority of the population in the countryside are landless laborers or small and marginal farmers. Now, what kind of politics happens in India in the name of kisan? You give them MSPs, you give them free electricity, you give them free water, you are giving them easy credit, you are giving them loan waivers. Who does it benefit? It only benefits the kisan class, and medium and large kisans. It does not benefit even the majority of the rural population. Take for example MSP, the minimum support price. Now, there was an argument in the 1960s when India has just emerged from the British rule, and 200 years of British rule were the 200 years of famine and starvation. Every 10 years or so, you had massive famines breaking out in one or the other part of India, in which millions would die. And it was so horrific. The response of the colonial administration was so indifferent that it should be actually classified as a crime against humanity. Because even if the British administrators would set up, let's say, relief camp, the amount of rations given to the Indians in the famine relief camp was less than what the Nazis used to give to the Jews in the concentration camp. So more people used to die inside the relief camp than outside the relief camp. But this is what we were when we became independent, and especially 60s was a very bad decade for India. There were back-to-back wars, there were back-to-back famines, and our food security was in a complete, a critical situation, a crisis situation. So at that time, there was this entire context, a need of incentivizing the farmers by giving them free electricity, free water, free seeds or subsidized seeds and fertilizers, and also a guaranteed price for their products. So we wanted to attain food security in India, and we focused on wheat and rice as two crops. And then the government focused on Punjab and Haryana as the focal point of implementing these policies. So at that time it was okay, you were giving them MSP, you were telling them, okay, go out and cultivate wheat, cultivate rice, and we assure you that we are going to buy whatever you produce at a good enough price, and your profits and your incomes are assured. But that doesn't make sense now, and in fact it doesn't make sense if we look at the overall context of the food security scenario or the food policy of India. So the three pillars of the food policy of India: one is to ensure the availability of the food grains for the people. Second is to ensure good return for the producers, and the third is to ensure lower prices for the consumer. Now, all these three aims or the objectives of the food policy in India are contradictory to each other. Because the moment you are trying to increase the food production in order to attain that food security, that you should have enough food stock in the country, the prices of the food grains will fall. And then in order to counterbalance that, so that you can give good return to the farmers or the kisans, you're going to give them artificially high prices in the name of MSP. Now, once you do that, you're feeding into inflation, which is hurting your third objective, that the food grade is available cheaply to the masses. And out of these three objectives is the MSP, or the interest of the Kisans in getting good prices and assured profit, which has gained prominence, which has become the de facto anchor of our agricultural policy. And it is not difficult to understand why, because in the political setup of India, as we were discussing, that India is an urban majority country now, but because we use the obsolete data of the census, its obsolete classifications, the number of seats in the parliament and legislatures are disproportionately allocated to the rural areas. So urban areas lose out on the political power. They do not have enough MPs and MLAs which they can send to the parliament or the state Vidhan Sabhas. Which means that if the party wants to win the election, they have to make sure they win seats in the villages, in the rural areas. And who is the dominant section in the villages? Is the farmer, is the kisan, जिसको अन्नदाता बोलते हैं. वो बहुतों के लिए त्रासदी का दाता भी होता है. उसको भूलना नहीं चाहिए. हमको ये नहीं भूलना चाहिए कि जो किसान आज यहाँ पे MSP के लिए प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं कि ये हमारा हक है, कि ये हमारा अधिकार है, ये लोग अपने खेतों में काम करने वाले मजदूरों को मिनिमम वेजेस नहीं देना चाहते थे. अभी भी नहीं देते हैं बहुत जगह पे. So we have to understand that these are the dominant sections of the agrarian society in India. They are not innocent, weak, vulnerable people. They are the one who rule, who dominate the countryside. And they are kisans because they are the landholders in the countryside. And they have the social power, they have the economic power. So if any political party wants to win the election, it has to necessarily make sure that the farmers are on its side, which means that they have to pander to their demands even if they are unreasonable. And nothing else explains why you have such a disastrous policy of giving free water, free electricity to the kisan continuing, despite clear evidence that it is destroying the entire ecology, it is destroying the entire environment, it is destroying the water tables, and whole North India is now potentially facing acute water shortage in the next few decades. Now, once you give MSP to the farmers, let's say take the example of Punjab. If you're giving them MSP, a very high MSP on wheat and the rice, what is happening? The biodiversity is getting destroyed. The Punjab used to cultivate a variety of crops before Green Revolution. Now they just only cultivate wheat and rice, more or less. The majority of the land is allocated to these two crops now. And the Punjab is an arid region. It's a water scarce region. It's not a water rich region like Eastern India. And you are having the cultivation of rice, which is destroying the water table. And it's interesting because Punjabis can't really do rice farming. So they get all these mazdoors and these laborers from Bihar and Bengal to work on their fields to do the rice cultivation. Now, MSP has created a very perverse incentive which is destroying water table, which is destroying the biodiversity, which is destroying the soil, which is destroying the environment. Because remember, the smog problem in Delhi is because they burn the stubble after the harvest of the paddy, and that is creating a havoc in the entire North India, not just in Delhi. In fact, the whole North India is now engulfed with the smog since the last decade or so. And no one is taking any action against it, because the reason lies in the allocation of political power, which disproportionately favors the rural areas over the urban areas. So any solution to this kind of farmer protest, this kind of farmer protest which is making unreasonable demands, that you roll back these central laws, that you make sure that MSP is guaranteed to us. I mean, no one is asking a simple question, that agriculture is the private sector and the farmers are the private producers. Why should the government or the state ensure desired prices and profits to one set of private producers over another? I mean, why only kisans? Why not traders? Why not businessmen? Why not potters, carpenters? Why not? I mean, this is something which cannot be even defended on the basis of principles. But we are doing that. And by guaranteeing them higher profit, what exactly are you doing? You are giving them higher MSP that feeds into inflation and that hurts not just the urban population, the urban poor, but also the majority of the rural population. Because remember, the majority of the population in the countryside are landless laborers or small and marginal farmers who are also net buyers of the food grains. So when the MSP goes up, the inflation goes up, and these people face the burn of it, while the medium and the large kisans benefit, their profits are ensured. And this protest which you are seeing is coming from Punjab. Because what happened during the Green Revolution, a new class of farmers arose in the Punjab, the capitalist farmers. Now, I know lots of you associate capitalism with big industry, big capital and all those things, but that's not true. These capitalist farmers are called capitalist farmers because they employ wage labor and they work on the profit motive. So they own the means of production, which is land and machinery. They employ labor, wage labor, not the traditional labor or the hereditary labor like earlier in India you used to have basically the Dalits and the ABCs doing that as a ancestral occupation. But now they employ the wage labor and they work on the profit motive. So they are capitalist farmers, and they have grown quite prosperous because the state has been supporting them. Green Revolution happened in Punjab because government focused only on Punjab, as simple as that. So these people now have become rich. Many of them have graduated to become money lenders, traders. They are the one who run the APMCs. They are the arhatiyas in the market. They control the local supply chains. They control the local trade and commerce. Now they feel threatened that with the opening up of the sector, their new feudal empire might be at risk. And that is why they are spearheading this protest. And owing to their social and economic power, they are able to mobilize other sections, to some extent, some more, some less, for these protests. And this is not surprising because if you look at the 1991 reforms, when Prime Minister Narasimha Rao implemented the reforms, the strongest opposition to those reforms came from the industrial houses and the business houses. They did not want the opening up of the economy because they had become so used to. They have acquired vested interest in the functioning of the license permit Raj. They did not want the competition, they did not want opening up, even though they were the main beneficiaries of the reforms. So even in this case also, the farmers are the main beneficiaries of the farm laws. But the resistance is so high because the vested interests are now trying to maintain the status quo because they fear that their social and economic power might decline in the coming years. I mean, who are protesting? These are the affluent farmers of Punjab and Haryana. And Punjab is a special case because in 1900, the British government made a law which effectively barred Hindus from owning any land in Punjab, agricultural land. So it was only given to the people who were in the military service, and because of the British policy, the military men were or the army men were recruited mostly from the Jat Sikhs or the Muslims. So they were the one who were getting all the agricultural lands. And when the Green Revolution happened, there was large-scale land grabbing in the Punjab, which is not even talked about. This is often said land consolidation. Yes, there was consolidation by grabbing the common lands. There was consolidation by forcing the smaller farmers, the weaker farmers, the Dalits and the weaker communities to sell their land. They had no choice but to sell their land to the richer farmers, to the middle farmers. And there was outright land grab of the Dalit lands in the Punjab. This is something which is not even discussed, documented. It shows you the extent of the social power exercised by these farmers. Now, so the condition in Punjab is that a very small percentage of people control or own any agricultural land. I mean, the Dalits are 35%, 30 to 35% maybe of the Punjab's population. They hardly own 3% of the agricultural land. and they are mostly the landless laborers, were treated in, let's say, not in a very good manner in Punjab. There are lots of restrictions imposed upon them by the farmers, by the kisans. Kisans dictate the terms to them that, we are going to pay you in only this much of money, and these are the terms and conditions. You can't do this thing. If you do not comply, we will not allow you to cross through our fields. Now, the Dalits do not own any land in Punjab, so they have their villages which are surrounded by the fields of the kisans. These kisans who are protesting. So if the Dalits do not agree to their demands, that you have to work at this wage or you have to do this, they will say your access is barred. You're basically trapped in your small hamlet or small basti in the middle of the village. You can't cross, because if you cross, you will met with really brutal violence. I mean, Punjab has a history of violence against the landless laborers, which is again not even talked about. So this entire politics of farmers' protest is much more deeper than what is being portrayed, what is being discussed in the media, not just in India but also in the Western countries. I mean, the Western countries, it seems that they don't even understand anything about India, the way they report about India. But the central point is that why is this happening? It is happening because the villages have disproportionate political power. Which means going forward, the agenda of the Indian political parties should be to reshape the political landscape of India. And they can do that by making sure that in the next delimitation, the number of seats allocated to the villages are reduced, the number of seats allocated to the urban centers are increased. It's not just about the people having permanent address in the cities or in the villages. It's also about huge migration population in these centers. So, in the recent Bihar election, lots of people from Noida and Ghaziabad left for their villages to vote. Now, these people have their permanent houses. They have their own houses in Noida, in Ghaziabad, in Delhi. These are the people who are living in Delhi for 10, 20 years, but they still have their vote back in their villages. So what is happening? It's distorting the Indian politics, because you are not exercising your demographic weight to pressurize the political parties to pay more focus on the urban centers, to resolve the urban issues, but you are going back in the election to your village and voting on the basis of the local village dynamics. Local caste, community or whatever dynamics they might have. Now, what kind of political process is that which disincentivizes people from making their voice heard or taking decisive action in the election in the areas they actually have real economic interest, rather than going back to their hamlet somewhere in far corner of UP and voting there on the basis of the local caste composition. Now, this is something which has to be thought of very seriously, and in the next delimitation, the seats of the urban center should be increased, and people should demand from the political parties that it should be done, that the allocation of the seats should reflect the demographic realities of India, which is that India is an urban majority country. This is not a rural majority country. असली भारत गांव में नहीं रहता है और पहले भी नहीं रहता था. आप भारत का इतिहास देखेंगे, so India has always have had the highest rate of urbanization in any time period. Any time period, you talk about Gupta, you talk about Mughal, you talk about whatever. भारत में शहरीकरण की दर अपने समय के हिसाब से, उस समय जितना संभव था टेक्नोलॉजी के हिसाब से, सबसे ज़्यादा रही है. तो भारत हमेशा से इंडस वैली से लेके आज तक एक शहरी सभ्यता रही है. असली भारत गांव में रहता है. ये जो है पिछले 200 साल का डिस्टॉर्शन है. When the Britishers came, the economy was destroyed. There was large-scale deurbanization, large-scale deindustrialization. So this is the context in which the Europeans were then talking about India, and Indian nationalists were responding to the European scholars. And another way we can do this is by focusing on the local elections, and this is why the recent elections of Hyderabad are so important. Now, the BJP fought the municipal elections like a mini national election. Lots of people were laughing, thinking, "Ye kya kar rahe hain? They are getting Yogi Adityanath, they are getting Tejasvi Surya, they are getting BJP President Nadaji to campaign in a municipal election. But the point is, why not? Why are municipal elections less important than the state elections? The urban bodies like the Hyderabad Municipal Corporation are very large. They are dealing with literally millions of people. The urban governance is a very complex problem. It's not a simple thing. So you need political heavyweights sitting out there. You do not need a lightweight mayor. You do not need someone who is there for the ceremonial post or for the namesake. You actually need, the political parties need to send their emerging Yuva Netas to become mayors in the cities. What will that achieve? That will achieve two things. First of all, that will shift the gravity of the political power. When municipal elections are hotly contested, when the political parties are invested in that, a strong leadership will take over the urban governance, because then that will become the pathway of the political career of the politicians. So they will do it seriously. And that will change how the urban governance is done, how it is focused, how much funds are allocated, how seriously it is taken. Over the time, it will also change the institutional setup, with more and more power will be vested in the municipal corporations, in the post of mayor, and which is what is needed. I mean, your cities, Indian cities are large. I mean, they have population in millions. Mega cities have population in more than 10 million or something. You can't govern them, just like you govern a small town in India. They have to be, the urban governance, the municipal corporations need to be centers of political power. And once that happens, you will see there will be a counter to this blackmail by the Kisans, who can do so because they control the keys to the election. So once delimitation is done, the seats are reallocated appropriately. And when the urban centers, the urban municipal corporations, the urban governance becomes the center or the focal point of political power in itself, then no one can come and blockade or threaten to blockade the cities, because there will be a counter mobilization by the political leadership of these urban corporations and cities. And this is what we need India going forward. So this was my point. I just wanted to throw some random ideas which I have, because I don't want this blog to be, pretending to giving you all the facts or the ultimate truth like so many other people do. It's just what I think. This is just what I read, what I understand, and I thought I will share my thoughts with you. So please do tell me that what do you think about these problems and these points which I have raised. Thank you once again, and good night, because it's almost 1 o'clock at night. Thank you.